I appreciate everyone coming out. I just want to say thank you. I think I say this every time, but there's a lot of things that you can do on your Thursday evenings, and we appreciate you coming out and spending time with us and wanting to learn. And I'm excited. I love that we do these educational pieces. Again, our staff is so knowledgeable, and especially about sports, about training, about everything we do, that I love the fact that we're able to get that information out to as many people as possible. And it's just fantastic to hear. With James, this is our second one. Ryan has done some. We've done the nutritional webinar. Recovery's in the works with CT coming out. So I just think we have so much information and so many things to share. This is such an awesome opportunity. So again, I appreciate you coming out and spending time with us. And speaking of T3 coaches, obviously James is tonight, and honestly, there's not too many coaches in the nation, let alone at T3, that have done more for T3 athletes than James has. I think that's evidence with his velo classes, with his the professional athletes he's trained. He's trained at every level: professional, youth, high school, college, you name it, he's done it. But I always feel like baseball training is always at the center of his heart. I think that's evident in the results that he's gotten from his velo classes, which is his baseball and softball classes. Those athletes have really taken their game to the next level, and again, the results speak for themselves. So it's awesome to have him here tonight and to listen to his information and see what he's going to say. So as we go through, any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat box. We will have a little bit of Q&A at the end. So if you're more comfortable waiting to the end to do, if not, just go ahead and throw it in the chat box. I'll shout them out when there's a little break in the action, but without further ado, James, take it away from me.
Awesome. Thank you, Eric. And, for everybody tuning in, I started 9 years ago at T3, and I'll get into a little bit more of that as we, get into the presentation. But, walking into a new environment, a new job, I always try and learn from the people around me. And, one thing that I picked up immediately from Eric was that he would always ask his kids, like, when are you coming in next? Are you going to come to my class? I would love to see you again. And that stuck, and it was evident with, how busy Eric's classes were and how many people that he trained on a weekly basis. And that really just showed me that this was a potential career that I could go into. Those who know me know that I started as a teacher and I was doing this part-time. But like seeing Eric do it as a full-time job and get so much enjoyment out of it really helped me be confident in making that jump to doing this as a full-time career. So thank you, Eric, for hosting again. And, I really appreciate everything that you've done for me as a coach over the last, 9 years going on 10 here. So, let's get into it. Let's talk about velo and what it takes to become a 5-tool athlete. Now, like Eric said, please interrupt me at any point if you have questions. There is, a decent amount of stuff that we're going to cover. And most of the time, it's better to ask a question while we're on that topic, so that we can either refer to the picture or refer to the video that I'm going over. So this presentation, the goal, is to give you guys some information of what it takes to be a 5-tool player. So the first slide, I have to go back to when in doubt, seek it out. I've learned from the people around me and from the people that I've had access to, either through personal coaching relationships or from a distance through social media and other things that we're able to utilize. So some names that I highly recommend that you write down and look into and research and check out are some of these coaches. So Eric Cressy has just paved the way for baseball performance training. I've learned so much from a distance from Eric. I've had the opportunity to meet him. He has 2 facilities, one in Boston and one in Florida. And one of our coaches, one of our best pitching coaches, actually works for the Massachusetts facility as their pitching director, who I'm still in contact with, Jordan Krause. And athletes that were here that were lucky enough to work with him, gained so much knowledge and so much direction from his coaching. Nick Winkelman is an expert on communication. We've actually had him on our podcast that I host with Coach CT. And his focus is how to get coaches communicating better with athletes to get better outcomes. And in a simple explanation of what he does is, he takes a movement and then finds relatable cues that athletes understand and implements them in their training. And again, you can dive into that podcast episode with Nick. Zach Dakant, he's the head baseball strength and conditioning coach at TCU. He pioneers boring training done excellently. And that's a theme. right? We have standards and movements that are universal to all sports. When you do those really well, you really get better at whatever sport you end up playing. So he's practicing what he preaches at a high level with the TCU baseball program. We've also had him on the podcast as well. Rob Oshinsky really got me down the rabbit hole with single leg strength training. I know him personally. We have a great, mentor-mentee relationship. I look up to him and what he does. He owns his own facility out in Pennsylvania. Lee Taft, he is the guy that changed the speed game. The false step is no longer a bad thing because of this guy. And we got into that in our speed presentation that we did about a year ago. But again, Lee Taft changing the game of speed. And then, I would be an idiot if I didn't mention how much I've learned from our T3 performance training staff, from our directors that we have, from Mike, the guy at the top. We are truly a learning organization, and we're always trying to grow and improve. And, everybody on staff, if you ask them, are you happy with where T3's at? They would say no. We are very happy with the work that we do and the outcomes that we get, but we still want more opportunities to change athletes' lives. And then, this past 2 years has showed us so much, going through the COVID experience, getting gyms taken away from us and then going back into training, and then seeing what happens, in the professional level of athletes getting hurt more often. And there has to be some, it's not a coincidence that we're seeing more injuries because of the lack of training. And it's not just in the NFL, we could look at all other sports, but that really helps us understand how important performance training is to stay healthy, but, really to get to the next level. And that's what we're going to talk about today. When people ask me, what do I do? I used to say I'm a strength coach. I've kind of changed my tone a little bit in the last couple of years. And I like to say that I help athletes learn how to build a bigger engine. I help them learn how to drive that engine. And eventually I teach them how to train themselves along the way. And I have the goal of handing over the keys to their own performance. So in a picture form, what I do is I take a smart car or a small car with a small engine, and I help kids to learn how to get a big engine. Because when it comes to throwing hard, running fast, or when it comes to hitting bombs, I would rather be driving that truck than that car. So put simply, we help athletes learn how to build a bigger engine and how to drive it. And then, who am I? So I went to Westlake High School, locally. I love working in the same communities that I grew up in. I had such a great athletic experience at Westlake, and we're lucky enough to be back in that school, training athletes, helping them. We always call it bleeding green, go Westlake Demons. We never beat Avon Lake, Eric. You always, kicked our ass when we played. And I think that would still happen today. But I love the community. I'm so excited to be back in there helping athletes over there. Then I went on to Ohio Wesleyan University. I got a phenomenal education in exercise science. Originally, I went out as a teacher. I had a great experience. I was able to play baseball there for 4 years, and I was able to do my student teaching and play football my last year. And during that time is where I found my love and passion for training. And I saw what it did to let me play 2 varsity sports at a collegiate level. And it definitely had a lot to do with what I did in the weight room in the off seasons. And then my time at T3 Performance, I've been a strength coach there for 9 years, going on 10. I've worked with baseball players, football players, lacrosse players, you name a sport. I've probably worked with an athlete of a random age group in a random sport. And it's been such a great experience seeing so many different sports and finding the similarities with what all athletes need, and then seeing that translate into the sport of baseball. And there's just a picture of me stealing a bag. That was one of my things is I love stealing bases. And so that was like our little celebration. We threw up the deer antlers, when we would steal a base back in the day. I don't know if that's still a thing or not. And there's a picture of me playing football. And, in addition to the weight room stuff, I learned how to be consistent and how to be gritty. Things didn't always go my way. I got hurt as a senior in my baseball season. And through, the grit that I've developed over the years, thanks to the help of my parents, being good examples of dealing with adversity, I was able to turn that, negative into a positive and go out and play football. And instead of ending my career, breaking my leg, sliding into second base with frozen ground on a rainy day, frozen rain, I was able to turn that around. And my last thing I did as an athlete was catch a touchdown pass. So, that was huge for me because I always identified myself and still do as an athlete. So let's get into it. So, the thing that I want everybody to take home, from this slide is, we have skills of sport. And those skills are anything from running, jumping, and these are things that we do in all sports. Go ahead. We have our running, we have our jumping, we have sprinting, we have striking. So this could be using a tennis racket to hit a tennis ball. This could be using a baseball bat to hit a baseball. We have throwing, again, different, we could throw a lacrosse ball with a lacrosse stick, or we could throw a baseball. And then we have, catching or fielding, receiving. We have reacting, we have what we call open, events in sports that aren't predictable. So we have to react to those. And then we have to rotate, whether we're running and changing directions, whether we're hitting, whether we're throwing, we have to rotate in all sports. We have shuffling side to side. We have pushing, pushing an offensive lineman away from us. And we have pulling, whether that be like a rower, a competitive rower. So those are the skills of all sports. Those are components of our training. And we often miss out on those skills when we start individualizing early in a specific sport. So the example using baseball is, if a kid says, I'm going to be a baseball player, and a baseball player only from 10 years all the way till, they're done playing that sport, some of these things don't get trained outside of the confines of baseball. And that's where performance training can come in and really, really help develop a general athlete. And now let's look specifically at what we need to do as a baseball player. And as you can tell, this is a pyramid. So if we build better skills of sport, that will help us get better skills at the sport of baseball. And those skills are throwing a baseball, throwing a curveball. Those are two different skills. Hitting a baseball, fielding a ground ball, turning a double play, stealing a base. So those are all things that are more specific to baseball, but the underlying skills of sport dictate the success that we have either acquiring those skills or showing up with those skills on game day. And to even kind of dive in further to those skills, we have that term that people love to use, which is a 5-tool player. Now, every 5-tool baseball player, if we can think of a couple, a young Barry Bonds, Ken Griffey Jr., and those might be old examples to our more current Frankie Lindors out there, right? I hope people know who Barry Bonds is, but you never know these days. But, or at least remember what he was like when he was a rookie and was a true 5-tool player. But, so we have those 5-tool players, and we want to look at what are the underlying components that athlete is put together with. So a 5-tool player, to get everybody on the same page, we have our hitting for average, hitting for power, speed, arm strength, and defensive abilities. Now, chances are, if you are able to do all 5 of these things at an elite level, you probably are going to go to college and get some type of scholarship to be able to do those at a high level, depending on how elite you are at those skills, kind of dictates where you go to school. And then what are the underlying things that we need to develop to become a 5-tool player? Well, that starts with the athlete, like we saw in that slide earlier. So stability, and we'll get into these in more detail as we go, but stability in positions specific to baseball or specific to skills of sport that help us in baseball, like running. Mobility. So are we strong at end ranges of motion? Am I able to get hip shoulder separation? Can I get into a deep lunge pattern? Speed. Now, speed here, right? If I'm going to be fast, right, that's going to be helpful in the game of baseball. Power, I always joke around, hit singles and stay single, right? The name of the game these days is power. I want to pull out this stat, but I'm not going to be exact with it, but there are more strikeouts and home runs in baseball now than ever, right? So that's just power pitchers and power hitters, right? The average hitter strikes out 1 out of 5 at bats, right? That's a tip your hat to the pitchers, right? But there's also more home runs. Now the averages have consistently dropped. So, hitting for average is not as big of a thing anymore if you can hit home runs. And then strength, so our underlying strength. So moving that into the next slide, I hope this is the main theme of the presentation today. When in doubt, lunge it out. When you're not sure what to do as a developing athlete, or if you're a parent running a practice, or if you're a parent helping your kids, single leg patterns for baseball specifically, in most sports, are going to be better bang for your buck exercises than other exercises. And to show you that example, here is a T3 athlete backwards lunging. This is not his bottom position. If it was his bottom position, his knee would be touching the ground, but he's getting there. This is just a screenshot. So our backward lunge, right? And we can look at this and compare it to a squat. And this is actually, one of our T3 baseball players, Division I baseball player right here. And he is executing a front squat phenomenally. But, we do use squats in our programming, but our lunges trump squats in terms of priority. So, believe it or not, this was not the main movement for the day. This was, an accessory movement. And he's just casually front squatting 330 some pounds. And it wasn't a max effort movement. And we'll get into maxing out, later. But so here's a lunge, very athletic. Here's a squat. He's doing it very athletically. But when we can choose between the two, we're going to choose lunges. And here's why. When we sprint, this is what it looks like for us to sprint at our top speed, and this is what it looks like to lunge. Kind of similar. When we hit, this is what it looks, when we hit, and this is what it looks like when we lunge. Very similar. And if you can remember what that squat looks like, not very similar. And when we throw. So here's a professional baseball player here throwing. He throws really hard, believe me, and it's hard to play catch with him. But again, let's look at the lower half setup, and let's look at a rotational med ball drill we do. Those movements line up. And then when we throw, we also have to decelerate that throw. So here's how we train that, a single leg pattern. Although not a lunge, the RDLs we use a lot. They pair up that posterior chain that we always talk about, glutes, hamstrings, calves. All right, and this helps us decelerate to throw. Again, two positions, very similar. And now you can see a med ball throw variation, again, working on that single leg stability. Also, when we throw, again, another professional athlete who's not great, not fun to play catch with. He won't miss a spot, but it's coming in hot. And again, another movement that we use that is single leg emphasis in the weight room. We call this one a landmine press. So, going through all those pictures, I hope that kind of opens some eyes, realizes how important and how much we should emphasize sprinting, throwing med balls, doing things on one leg in our strength training, one leg at a time. But not all lunges are equal. And this is one of my athletes who I've worked with for a long time, incredible human being, incredible athlete. And we're going to show you two different versions of the same exercise and why we have certain intention behind this focus. So this is kind of taking a microscopic look at a single leg pattern, but we're going to go ahead and play the first video. And I'm going to play it twice and then freeze it. So this exercise we would call a barbell backward lunge. And then there's the second video. So I'll play the first one again. And then there's the second one. Now I'll open it up. If anybody wants to jump in and tell me one difference between these two sets, I would invite you to participate here. Either put it in the chat box or shout it out. All right, so I'll dive in a little bit here and kind of show you the difference. So when we're doing this lunge pattern, we can see with the video that I'm playing right now, at the bottom position, he's very strong, but his hips shoot back away from where that weight is. So you can see that right here, his hips shoot back before he goes up, and he'll do it again on this rep, back and then up, right? And now we can look at the other set where he drives more into the barbell, right? His hips are right here and they're driving more towards the bar. And I know that's a minor change. And I'm not gonna lie, I asked Skip to do a bad rep here to show it, and he still had a hard time doing a bad rep. But you guys can see the idea. And so what's actually happening there is during our movement, where we're trying to do this lunge pattern and recruit our quads primarily in our glutes. In the first video, we actually kind of dump that weight by shifting our hips back into our lower back, all right, into our hamstrings more so. So not all lunges are the same. It's not good enough to just say, okay, let's give them lunges and we'll be happy. But we have to coach that lunge, and we have to have standards. We have to touch our knee to the ground, and we have to have expectations that the athletes know that we're working with, so that they can perform that movement, because it's more important to have a quality movement than to let an athlete just go up and go up and go up if we see something wrong in the lift. I heard one of our coaches say this, shout out to Matty Mullins, don't load dysfunction. So if we can't coach an athlete out of this just by some simple cues, there might be something going on there. Gip, obviously, like he's fine. I just said, hey, do a bad rep, do a good rep. But sometimes when we see this over and over again, we really have to dive in there and figure out what's going on and be a detective. So, that's an example, but we could use this example in other exercises in the weight room. We have to have intention behind what we do. It's not just good enough to say, let's just lunge instead of squat. All right. So, recapping everything from those last couple of slides, it's better to do single leg exercise than double leg exercise, specifically for baseball and other sports too. But that's going to help us translate the work that we do in the weight room into performing better on the field. And where do we start with all of this? Let's start with the low hanging fruit. So, we need to warm up with intention, and we need to warm up hard. We should be breaking a sweat before we practice or before we train. That's how we start off the tone of a good session. And a lot of times athletes don't always have that structure for them. So they might have to get early to practice to warm up the T3 way. We have to evaluate our priorities. If I have those list of 5 tools, where am I weak at? And where do I need to spend more time? Now in baseball, I gave the example of there's more home runs than ever. So if my weakness is speed, but my strengths are everything else, I don't have to get really fast. I just shouldn't be slow anymore. So, I still want to develop more and more power, but I do need to spend some time on not being slow. And that's going to be through self-reflection, taking a hard look, an objective look at your skill set, and making decisions in your training based on that skill set, what you need to improve to be closer to a 5 tool. And we want to define intended outcomes. If I don't have defined intended outcomes, training becomes exercise and sweating as opposed to performance-based training. And really, it can just be an intentional switch with what I want to get out of my training session. That could be little goals along the way of saying, I'm going to lunge 200 pounds. I'm going to lunge 220 pounds. I'm going to lunge 300 pounds. There is a correlation between how much we lunge and how hard we throw and how fast we run. So those should be a part of your intended outcomes of your training, is to increase your single leg strength. We specifically use the lunge because it is standardized. We can judge it as a good rep or a bad rep, and we do track that as we go as an athlete. And the last thing is intent. I talked a little bit about it there with our number 3, defined intended outcomes. But we need to have intent. We need to show up consistently, whether we're in season, out of season. Objects in motion stay in motion. So diving into our warm up and speed segment of this, if we take 15 minutes before practice or training, and we train 3 times a week, that means we're warming up for 45 minutes per week, and we are going to be warming up 3 hours per month. And that means we're going to be about warming up for 36 hours a year. Now, most athletes will warm up more often than 3 times a week for a practice or a training session. So this is a very conservative estimate of how much time we spend warming up. If we're not doing it with intent, if we're not doing it to get a little bit faster in the warm up, break a sweat, work on our speed, we're kind of wasting those hours that we have to do anyway. So, a good training session starts with a good warm-up, and warm-ups should get us out of breath. It should shake our day off, and it doesn't always have to be the same thing, but here are some key components that can start us off right. It has to be routine enough for athletes to run. I do run the Velo group. Eric actually got to guest coach it yesterday. And if me or Eric wasn't there and we asked one of our older athletes to warm it up, they know the routine enough to do a good enough job to get everybody in that group breaking a sweat. And then we can occasionally mix it up for fun. And what that looks like in training, hey guys, go play ultimate football for 10 minutes, go. Losers do push-ups, right? Mixing it up for fun is a good way to kind of shake some dust off and get kids relaxed and focused on the training session, and forget about, what tests they took earlier that day, or, what coach is calling them or isn't calling them back, from a recruiting standpoint. So once in a while, it's good to mix it up for fun. And as long as we're breaking a sweat and not playing ultimate football before every training session, it can be appropriate. This brings me back to my baseball coaching days when I was coaching a 12-year-old travel baseball team. And every once in a while, when the kids, I could tell they needed to mix it up, we would do some yoga in the outfield. All right. So, it can be anything, but most of the time we should have some structure to it. And then it should be dynamic, right? So ultimate football is dynamic. That's an example of a fun one. But our warm-ups usually start with some back pedals, very dynamic. We don't backpedal a ton, so it's a good movement to work in. And then we go through some standing stretches, some stretches on the ground, and then a couple stretches that might even look like speed training, depending on how you view it. High knees, butt kickers, get them moving. That's the key. And sprint starts. So we can win the warm-up by adding 4 to 6 sprint starts to each warm-up. And again, do the math. If we're doing 4 extra sprints every day, that's 12 extra sprints every week. Keep multiplying it, every month. We're going to be doing 48 extra sprints if we're warming up with intent than if we're not. All right. And to, the meat and potatoes of, the Velo program. When we try and get better at everything, we usually don't get better at anything. So I like to simplify it. And if I could ask my athletes, like, what are your big 4 lower body movements that you want to improve? And what are your big 4 upper body movements that you want to improve? I would hope they would come back with these answers. So, we have our front squat reverse lunge. In the video that I played earlier, that was a barbell on the back reverse lunge. I go back and forth between the two. I'm not in love with either of them. I do have a preference to the front squat grip when I'm teaching it. It helps us brace our core a little bit better. So that's why I have front squat grip, reverse lunge. And it's always a good marker when we talk to a kid. What are your goals? What can you lunge now? What's your next stepping stone there? Our hex bar deadlift. There's just so much bang for your buck. No matter what sport you play, it's a phenomenal exercise. It's easy to coach. It's easy to get it set up right. And it's fun, when you can see that technique improve and that number start going up. And it's a little bit safer, than a barbell deadlift. And it's a little bit more athletic prepared because it is our base athletic position that we're getting strong in when we're using a hex bar. And I'll show you a video of that here soon. Then we also have our single leg squat. This is the picture right here of one of our T3 athletes doing a 100-pound single leg squat all the way down, back to that single leg strength. And our Nordic hamstring curls, last but definitely not least, we have our athlete right here going all the way, not using any upper body. We call those ham ropes, not hamstrings. That is a line that one of our athletes actually came up with. All right, and then our big 4 for the upper body. Deficit push-ups. So that is like doing a push-up, but having your hands a little higher than where the ground is. So our goal is to be able to take our hands, go through a full range of motion, right? Getting our elbows back and keeping our elbows close and being able to push ourselves back up. Owning your body weight is so important because when we're throwing a baseball, we're not holding any weights other than that ball. So you have to own your body weight head to toe. Chin-ups. There is a lot of good research by a guy named Dr. Heenan of the 90-mile-an-hour formula. And he has some good research studies about how chin-ups and being able to do a certain amount of chin-ups decreases the risk for any type of elbow injury. Then we have our landmine press, and that's this picture right here. This is a little bit nuanced. Not everybody has access to an actual landmine attachment, but landmines are actually really easy to set up if you can just wedge a barbell into something. And it's a phenomenal full range of motion exercise for the upper body, as opposed to a barbell bench press where we won't really get that end range scapular protraction, which can, get into some supporting muscle structures that help us throw and help us decelerate, as well as accelerate, in terms of baseball throw. And last but not least, an inverted row. This could be a TRX row. We use those suspension trainers, TRX systems. We could also use a barbell for those as well. But it's two different ways that we can row. One is going to be a vertical pull, and then one is going to be a horizontal pull, and similar, with how we structure that upper body lift. So that kind of sums up my big four. And before we go any further, here's two good examples of that single leg squat. So another one of our athletes is doing 100 pounds. You can see that, he is very strong on both legs. And that is very important when it comes to like, how do we load to hit and how do we load to throw? It's on mostly one leg. But mostly one leg, if we hit 100 times, I'm left-handed. I'm only using my left leg to generate force. This helps me balance out and prevent any type of nagging injuries that might occur just from swinging on one side of the plate all the time if we're not training. And then here's that hex bar deadlift. As you can see, another one of our athletes and interns showing us what a heavy hex bar deadlift looks. I like this because we can go heavy without maxing out on it and still get a ton of benefit from one, holding something heavy, and two, pushing through the ground, which is a common theme when we are talking about skill acquisition and being able to produce maximum force. Now, the hex bar deadlift isn't a single leg exercise, but it is so beneficial when it comes to like just our producing maximum amounts of effort and then using something really heavy in the weight room to kind of replicate that. All right. And then, we could run the worst program written ever, but if we do these three things, we're still going to have positive outcomes. And then when you compare a good program and some good exercise selection in that, we're going to be really moving the needle forward in terms of our sports performance. And if you ask any of my athletes that I work with in the Velo group, hey, what was your goal for today? That they will tell you that I need to work hard. I need to learn something new today. And I need to sweep the shed. And what that means is I need to leave the gym better than I found it. I need to leave my teammates that I just worked out with better than I found them. I need to help people. It's bigger than me. It's about the culture of this group. And that's how we're going to get maximum benefit from our training. So, I'm going to leave it open for questions right now. And I wanted to get through most of that presentation to open it up for questions that you might have. Either about our Velo program, about exercise selection, about anything related to being, a foundation, earning the foundations to be a 5-tool baseball player.
Sure. There was one real quick. What kind of single leg exercises can an athlete maybe do at home? Is there things that are beneficial that they can do in the basement, in the backyard, in the garage, something like that for them?
Absolutely. So in my opinion, the most bang for our buck exercise obviously is lunges. So just doing those continuous for a designated amount of time has a lot of benefit depending on where you're at in your development. If you're a younger athlete, you're going to develop strong, durable muscles and you're going to build some work capacity. So for example, you don't have any equipment. Day one, you could start with 5 minutes of lunges. Day two, go to 8. Day three, go to 10. And a lot of our high level pitchers use those distance lunges as part of their active recovery day on days after they throw. It takes zero equipment. And if you want to make it challenging, you could load up a backpack, put it on the front side of you with your textbooks and do some walking lunges with a weight vest or a backpack. Get a ton of benefit for that. And then pairing that up, because we don't want to ignore our posterior chain, we could do a single leg RDL with that backpack, which was one of the slides that I showed earlier. But you could just use textbooks, you could use anything. And again, the lower the weight, the more reps you need to do to elicit a response. If it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. So sometimes that just means doing more and more reps when we don't have access to equipment.
That's I think that's fantastic. And again, I think a lot of times people think of exercise as only being in a facility. You know, you're only at a gym. That's the only way to do things. Like you said, you just have to be creative. You know, grab your book bag. I'm guarantee you each backpack probably weighs 20 pounds. You know, for the textbook, all the things you have in there, that's going to be ample enough amount of weight to get stronger.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that during the school year, you're wearing that backpack on your back so much that it's going to
Mhm.
kind of change our posture a little bit. So it would be very beneficial to throw it on the front side of you and either walk or do some lunges or do some RDLs. And we call that anterior loaded anytime we have a weight in front of us. But just again, to kind of balance out the body, give it what it needs.
Excellent. And same,
Awesome.
any questions that pop up that you were kind of waiting to ask, you know, go ahead and throw in the chat room or just jump in. Another one too was how much does mobility come into play when we're talking about speed and power and things like that?
Yeah, and I think that mobility is one of those hot button terms these days when it comes to our performance training. But it's great if we can touch our toes. It's better if we can be strong in end ranges of motion. So mobility is important, but we need stability and strength at those end ranges of movement. And there are some simple things that we can do to increase our mobility specific to baseball. And I'm glad you brought this question up. But my favorite, mobility routine for a baseball player after they throw is to hang from a bar for 60 seconds and then hold a push-up hold for 60 seconds and do that 3 to 4 rounds to kind of repattern, stretch, and strengthen some of those main movers and prime movers when it comes to throwing a baseball.
And that's good too, because what you're just saying is that mobility, the mobility exercise that you just brought up, and then even to your slides on the skills of sport compared to skills of baseball, and even your warm up. Again, we're not just, we're talking about baseball here tonight, but it's not unique specifically to baseball players. We're talking about athletes as a whole. And same thing, like you said, those two mobility drills that you were just talking about will affect any human that moves, right?
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy. 9 years ago, how different I would train a baseball player and a football player, and flash forward to now, how similarly I train those two athletes with just a couple different variations. So our big four for football is our big four for baseball. For baseball, we just add a lot more rotation during the off season because that's the demand of our sport. Even a track athlete, man, if we look at those positions that we need to hit, when we're sprinting, the big four are going to be the big four.
That's a great thing to bring up too, because not all of our baseball players only play baseball. They're going to be multi-sport athletes. So this is going to, run the gamut of everything they need to improve on for every sport.
Yeah, 100%. That's why I was so excited when we started our middle school BELO program, because those are mostly multi-sport athletes. Maybe there's only a couple of baseball only athletes in our middle school program. But those kids are seeing the benefit in other sports that they're playing while they're still training in the VELO class. They're still getting benefit in their other sports that they play.
Awesome. And then maybe another 10 seconds. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat box. If not, I do this every time. I always think of questions afterwards and say, hey, I should have said this. I should have asked them that. That's a possibility. Make sure you reach out to James. It's james@t3athlete.com. Any questions you might have, you can also reply to the invite email that you received at info. That'll make its way to James as well. So any questions that might come up later tonight after you're laying in bed, you're going back over, memorizing everything that James just talked about. You're going to think of some questions that you should have asked. Make sure you send them over to us too, so we can get you set up and get you on the right path. But
yeah,
James,
I wanted to end and before we completely wrap it up, so I've been working hard on trying to reach more athletes than just being in the gym in person and helping those athletes that are in front of me. So one of the projects I've been working on has been creating an ebook that is called The Foundations of a Five-Tool Baseball Player. So you can see here on the screen share, that's the cover and that's the table of contents. So this is a more in-depth look at everything that we just talked about. I want to respect everybody's time, so I wanted to give some concepts out, and hopefully you can pull one or two things away, that we talked about. But if you want to learn more, I'll be releasing this ebook on October 15th, and I pretty much finished it today, so I'm excited. I just need to have my dad proofread it. He always helped me when I was in school, and I asked for his help one more time to make sure there's no grammar mistakes in there. So the ebook, I'm excited about it. Foundations of a Five-Tool Baseball Player. There's the cover. It covers everything from how to warm up with specific warm-ups in there of what to do. There's linked videos. There's more in-depth descriptions on my workouts, and there's an 8-week program that I give to you with this ebook. So I'm going to follow up and email everybody when this is live. But in the meantime, reach out. I have my other email address here. So I have james@t3athlete.com, as well as jpdibisio @gmail.com, or just call me. That works too. So like I said, I'm going to release this ebook. Anybody that was in this seminar can get 50% off. The code is going to be T3Velo. So I'll follow up when I do launch that on October 15th. And I really want to say, thank you, Eric. I appreciate you always do such a great job hosting these. We wouldn't be able to host this webinar series that we do at T3, without you kind of taking the lead on getting these organized for us.
I appreciate that. I mean, again, not to keep beating a dead horse, but again, the conversations that we have at T3 and whether it be coach to coach or coach to athlete, dude, are so knowledgeable, and there's so much information in the minds of our staff head. We just got to get that information out. And this is such a fantastic platform to do that. So again, James, thanks for coming out. I mean, honestly, I don't know if you can see, but I actually wrote down like notes myself to bring into my training too. So I appreciate the information that you're sharing with us. Again, any questions you might have, send them on over, and or come see us at T3. You know where we are. So fantastic. Again, thanks again, James, and have a good Thursday.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.